Well, the After Hours building was conceived of a long time ago. I've always lived in downtown Phoenix, and I've always lived in downtowns wherever I've lived, but I've lived here for a long time. And there just came a point where it was possible for me to consider combining my businesses, with a public space and my residence all into one small little building. And having lived here for a long time, I've seen all the empty lots all over the city, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if somebody actually created a small-scale infill project? And so by that I mean, by infill I mean that I wanted to take a vacant lot that was tiny and put something on it where it would be a combination of business use, residential use, and maybe public space or retail use. And so some things happened in the early 2000s and had the opportunity to do it. And so in 2003 and 2004, I think that's when we first started planning this building. And so that was the idea, is keep it all downtown, make it something where you live 24/7 and work 24/7, and people are occupying the space 24 hours a day in an urban environment. Is sitting on a single family lot on McDowell. So I think our lot is like 9,000 square feet, and we have an office on it. We have a gallery space that we participate in for first and third Fridays. So we have openings every month with a new show, and then we have our residence on the top. So our building is used all the time. There's always somebody here, and there's always something going on in a single family lot. And so you start thinking about, wow, how many of those are around downtown? There's a lot of potential to do some pretty exciting things. Our building's super green in the sense that we used a lot of recycled materials in the building, but the building itself was designed so that even 50 years from now, or 20 years, or if we ever moved out or whatever, you can reconfigure this building and slice and dice it into multiple pieces. It could all go commercial, it could all go residential, it could do a bunch of things without tearing things down. And then when we built our building, we pre-planned for other people to use it, so we put in phones and data and electrical in places where we thought, we're never going to use this, but the next person might. Somebody could put cubicles in our building and still have all the power without ever drilling a hole in a wall or the floor. So it's pretty neat that way. So I think that kind of thinking is pretty interesting and pretty exciting. And then even ultimately, our roof is sided so we could put solar on it. We haven't because it was way too expensive back then. And we might soon, I don't know. There's some incentives now to do it. I mean, I like the idea of urban living, the idea that maybe you don't need your car for everything, or you're close enough to public transportation for certain things that you can go and not use a car. I like the idea of being able to walk or ride my bike to restaurants, or to entertainment, or to theater, or anything like that, or to the airport for that matter. And so with the coming of light rail to downtown and the slow and steady revitalization of Phoenix proper as a downtown, it just seemed like a good time. There's so many reasons that I think infill is really important. A lot of it is just quality of life for an entire city. Phoenix is a city of empty lots, and whether they're city-owned or privately owned, and when you do infill, you don't create new infrastructure. So you're not wasting energy and resources. You build density, which is also just increases, I think, the quality of life, especially if it's well thought of density. It makes it possible for you to not necessarily have to have a car to go everywhere. So there's kind of an environmental thing there, although I wouldn't say that was the driving force. But I miss cities. I used to live in cities like Portland and New Orleans and San Francisco and stuff like that, where the city's alive and vibrant. And it's alive and vibrant because people live and work and do commerce and eat and entertain themselves all in the same areas. And Phoenix isn't like that yet. You drive to your entertainment. You go drive somewhere else to go to dinner if you're going to go out. You can't do it all in one smaller space, and that's why people go to those other cities. And why can't we do that here? Here we have a city where 9 months of the year, it is the most spectacular weather. You can be outside, inside, all the time, and yet we don't embrace that in a small scale way. One of the reasons to do projects like ours is to avoid becoming a city of empty lots that are just paved. Now, paved is maybe better than a dirt lot covered in garbage, which is what our lot was. But paving, it just adds to the heat factor here. It's not beautiful. It's not thoughtful. There's sort of a growth in this idea of what they call 2/1 or 3/1 or 4/1. And the idea is that what if you take those parking lots and those are the bottom floor, but then you build a second, third, fourth floors on top of those, and that's where people live or where they work. That's a more interesting use of space. So now you would actually end up with covered parking because you'd have shade underneath the building, and then occupancy on top of it. I've given that a lot of thought. I love the ideas of those things. They're fraught with issues and insurance and who's going to pay for things and all that kind of stuff. I would actually more lobby that a little bit more time be taken to think about how to use spaces more permanently. I think temporary stuff's okay, but when you build a community garden, that's a fantastic way to use space. But when they're temporary, everybody has a coronary when the temporariness is over. And then you have like these huge problems. So in a way, I would almost rather build those in as a permanent part of the city and say this is going to be a community garden for 50 years versus just doing something for a few. So I think committing to those things would be more interesting than temporary. The temporary stuff, it's just hard. I've been too exposed to it maybe in a way. Love the ideas, but once you really get into the nitty gritty, they're hard to do. So I'd rather the city think about how do you really make that more long term. And if it's temporary, then maybe it's more temporary park kind of things where trees are in boxes, and maybe there's some encouragement for those kinds of things. But no, I mean, the idea of having more green space downtown, great. The tough part is that even with the parks that we have, they're very underutilized. So are more of those better? Community gardens are great because they invite people to come and make something and do something. So I would rather make those more permanent than just temporary. I mean, doing something with land is better than doing nothing. I mean, I'd rather have anything other than the blight that those empty lots provide. I mean, they make the place feel unsafe. They make it seem very unfriendly. I would love to see more solutions like that. But it's a sticky thing because of insurance and because of who's responsible for the caretaking of those things, the liability. Those are the harder things that the moment you scrape away the surface of the idea, you have to deal with. And then who owns the land? A lot of times those landowners don't want to deal with that. So it's a bigger set of issues. There's some things that have been passed by the voters that are very unfavorable, that make it very difficult to mandate that people who own vacant lots actually have to do something with them versus just speculate. So it becomes very complicated very, very fast. That's why one of the reasons. That's also why we built this project. Though, is we took a tiny little piece of land. It was privately owned, not city owned, and got rid of the blight and put in something interesting. My big thing that I really wish the city would think about and the development community is how can you foster 100 or 1,000 little projects versus focusing all your efforts on one big project. We've had 4 giant projects downtown, or 5 in the last few years. You've had both, Bankman Ballpark and the basketball stadium and the Rouse Project Arizona Center, and you've got Cityscape going in, and you've also had the Convention Center. Those are all big, giant, city-supported, city-underwritten, tax-abated projects that have not, by themselves or even combined, changed the quality of living downtown in a big way. Cityscape remains to be seen. I'm very optimistic and hopeful for that project. But the stadiums didn't make downtown better. They just ghettoized that part of town. There was like influx of people, then they go away. And the restaurants down there still struggle. But a little project like this, if you had 100 little teeny blocks infilled with galleries like what we have here, or little restaurants, or little retail, and that people were living in those spaces as well and working in them, you would transform the city. And 100 projects like ours cost a lot less than one project like Cityscape.